Let's make sure those are all connected before we begin. Looks like we're all set up there. Okay. So I think that should be good. Let me just make sure I get my wet palette all set up as well. And we should be on our way with a much better setup than what we've been working with beforehand. So let me get this guy ready to go. Okay. Do have some excess water we need to take care of as well right now. First, let's make sure this guy has enough water in the pellet. Okay. And then let me make sure that I throw the water back in the bottle from where it had spilled out. Often the excess water does get thrown into the actual case in which holds my wet palette, so that's something we just gotta take care of every time we go about this. But with that, it looks like we're ready to get going. We do have a few things we'd like to paint up today on our schedule. There are some, let's see here. So there's gonna be some of the inner circle companions that we have here. I started on some of them with some of the main colors of the I guess it's called dark green, but we got dark green and the actual pinks on there as well. And then later on we got 3 of those guys, and then we will have an Azrael to paint that we have primed, and we'll see how he will look like, as he'll be the one leading a squad of 6. Earlier in this channel's history, we've done a squad of 3 of Inner Circle Companions, but we're going to move up to completing that squad of 6 as soon as we can. So hopefully you'll all be a part of this as we work our way through. Let me just make sure I get all of my brushes ready. 0, 1, and 2 are normally what I work with the most, and then we switch our way through depending on the situation. So hopefully, again, this is a slightly different setup than what we've been working with before. Hopefully this will be a bit of an upgrade, as the colors don't show very well, nor does the camera focus that great until now. Hopefully this will show a bit better. I know sometimes the camera won't focus. It's on auto, as it usually is, so we'll have to deal with things being out of focus, but hopefully the colors will show as intended here with these guys up front. So the last thing I remember actually that I want to do is we will need to get to edge highlighting these guys, although I'm trying to think about exactly what I was going to use at least for the robes, because I know what we've been doing before is that we would have an edge highlight of AK's light green. This is normally what I use to get the edges all sailed nicely for my Dark Angels models. But then for something, I'm hoping for a lighter pink, but we don't really have anything of the sort right now available to us. So I don't know if we need to get to mixing or not, or if I'm gonna have to just go with something that I already have in front of me. So we might need to do a little bit of experimentation, but that's all part of the experience now, isn't it? So we got our work cut out for us. And one of my paint bottles looks like there's sprung a leak on there. I do need to scrape that out real quick before we get into this. Of course, the old issue about maintenance of your paint pots and things of that sort, especially with Citadel paints, that is just the reality for hobbyists like us. Seems to be quite a bit of thick crust that is preventing this pot from closing properly. If I'm not trying to rip out the actual lid itself. Yeah, that's a really hard crust that got itself onto there, but will I be able to remove it from here? Let me just break it up a bit. This is gonna be quite a bit of challenge. That crust has really formed on the outer edge where the seal needs to form onto the bottle itself. Just really trying to use my knife to really cut through it and pull out the affected pieces of it. You got one of them out. We'll see if that will do it. That's a little bit better, but now we gotta really make sure this thing is shaken up, because sadly some of it got dried out from my layer paint of Evil Sunz Scarlet, which I think I would like to try to use as the edge highlight for the robes. We might have to do a bit of experimenting with that. So in the meantime, we need to make sure that our knife is cleaned up nicely before we continue. Good enough. Okay, so what I want to get to right now, like I said, I think for first order bits that we have done before, if I get my zero brush here, is we'll be using AK's light green as a form of edge highlight for these guys and their green armor, hopefully to give some depth to their green armor that they already have. So let's get started with that, and then we'll see to it what we can experiment with the robes themselves, as we also move on to different colors that we can try to experiment with as well. So this light green will also come in handy if I don't fling my caps everywhere. But nonetheless, the light greens will be helpful to give us that starting depth, and then we'll move on to getting to the pinks later on. So what I usually like to do, especially with edge highlighting, is actually get a little bit of dilution going on, just enough as we mix in more with the water, because an easier flowing paint is much better to work with rather than a very thick consistency, especially when we're dealing with the edges, in which we kind of want to make sure our lines are easily workable for these guys. So get some on the edge there, and let's get to doing some of this. So hopefully the frame rate isn't too bad. Again, this is the new camera that we were trying to work with to see if we can get a better view as to what we're doing here. So at least for this, we can try to work our way around the shoulder pad here, because there'll be a mix of this light green as well as the gold of the trim of his shoulder pad. So we follow along here. Just like this. Okay. Same deal is going to this side. Okay. I think we can get a bit more definition if we also highlight along the I basically call it a piece of parchment that's almost scrawled out on his shoulder pad. It's just attached to that part. So you can follow that contour. Again, the thinner paint actually can move into the parts that are hard to reach by brush, and that kind of helps us move things along here as you do something like that. So we get a little bit more definition along those edges, as we can see right there. And the camera might have a little bit of tough time focusing. I wonder if there's a setting I can change about that, but I mean, not really. Yeah, we'll have to deal with that later on a different time. Another case though, that's currently what we're looking at for his shoulder pad. And then let's actually go to his extra armor plate that's between his shoulder and his body. These things usually should be getting a line coming across here along the edge. And then we're later going to color that skull most likely in silver, or we can get it with gold if we want this guy to be a little bit more flashy. We'll repaint over that skull part with more later. We can go ahead and get this edge underneath as well, so that way we can get that well defined. Okay. Let's go over to this hip pad as well. All right. Move over to his forearm here. Yeah, that works for now. We get some edge highlights on his hands and his arms there. Let's move over to his next hip pad, because these guys do have a lot of them. Okay. think that'll really about do it for his power pack on his backside. And then we can move on over to, we got 1 foot out of his robe, so we'll take care of that real quick. Okay. That would work for this guy here for now. So I'm wondering if we can get away with seeing what would work as a good edge highlight for the robes with the current colors that I have right now. Because we do need to work with a more flinging my brushes everywhere too, which is really funny, but still the question remains after I throw my brush onto the ground as to what to do with the robes, because we do want a little bit more on the edge for those guys as well, so we need to figure something out. I'm thinking more along the lines of perhaps if we get some, might need to do a little bit of mixing here, but I think we can get to a probable solution. So I think maybe a mix of some corn red, which hasn't been used yet on these guys, and then maybe a touch of I have this grimy gray from AK. Again, we're gonna have to do a bit of experimenting here. We do want something a bit lighter than their Screamer pink that they're already at, and see what would work. So I have to get in the business of mixing a little bit, but we'll see which one works the best for these guys. So I don't need that much corn red. I'll just get some onto my palette, although this very cheap brush is having its bristles fall off on me already. So that's fun. Just plucking them out like old hairs. Of course, plenty of it just remains straight onto the bristles. So that's fun. It's like it's dyed the actual hairs on the thing. Okay, anyways though. All right, so we'll get some of this grimy gray here. Always make sure to give our bottles a good shake to make sure everything is nice and even. Let's throw a touch of that onto there. And let's see what we get. Yeah, that's a nice pink to begin with. Let's see, we might have to extend this out a bit longer than we can, because somehow a bunch of paint just gets caught right up onto the bristles of this cheap brush. So we'll need to employ some tactics to preserve some onto my finer brush here. Well, I'm using a number 2. Why am I using a number 2? Oh well. Let's just see what this looks like, just to humor ourselves a little bit here. So if we get our model and we apply just a touch of this, that is very subdued, but I think we're getting to something here. So I wonder if you can see it. I don't know if the camera would even pick it up. Here we go for another coat here. So, and those are some very nice and subdued pinks onto that guy. But it looks like we're going to need more paint because hardly any of it was retained onto the actual wet palette. So we will need to first off, clear off this really cheap flat brush that I should stop using and get into the business of making a good consistency of this much material here. So go back to some corn red. Okay, and then we go get the touch of this grimy gray. So we get a little bit of this subdued pink up here. And let's put this back to the test again. So if we go somewhere along here, perhaps because the lighting doesn't stand out the best, but it is quite evident on the actual robes themselves. So we'll accept this for now as an edge highlight for the robes. I was trying to add some more depth to these flowing robes that these guys have. So hopefully this could really add a bit more to what we normally see on these guys. Because the Screamo Pink is a really nice base color, but we would need a little bit more help on the edges to really make it seem like these robes are flowing as these guys are swinging their very powerful swords on the tabletop. So just go about it on the raised surfaces of the sky. And perhaps a bit more on the edge out here. Okay, now we've got his underneath his elbow here. And then maybe just a little bit onto his hood off the top. And I get the right angle because the sword is right in front of his face. Okay. I think that should do it for his robes. So that actually came out a lot better than I thought. Hopefully with this mixture color, and we'll get back to doing some more on the other guys. So in the meantime, I would like to employ a little bit of gray onto where the smoke is going to be coming out from this guy, at least in the back, because he's got his little smoky part behind his jetpack, or power pack. Jump packs are other guys entirely. So let's see here. I do have a little bit of gray remaining here. This is Vallejo's dark gray. Hopefully we can bring a little bit of this back to life here. And then we'll go ahead and apply some other colors to this after the first coat. So this is just the base coloring to get something started. On the smoke trail that comes out from this, okay, this brush is already ready, so you might as well throw this on the rest of the guys real quick as well. Doesn't take very much to get this first coat going, and we need to wait for it to dry nonetheless before we apply the lighter coats on top to then really start to see the effect of this come into place. Should I work with something? It's going to be a bit darker towards the source of where this is burning, and then the smoke will turn into a lighter color over time that we work on with layers of lighter gray colors until we get almost to a white at the very edge there. For now, we start with this dark gray color to get everything fully coated, and then we keep moving our way through to make the effect that the smoke does dissipate out when it leaves the burner or smoker, whichever way you want to see it. They don't really describe exactly what the heck is going on with these things. Okay, so leave that there for now. What I do want to get to next, I can switch my brushes and we can start with some of the golden highlights on these guys. So it's going to be their the outlines of their shoulder pads, the whole actual, what do you call it? I guess a regalia on their backside, and then some parts of the pommel. I think I want to actually go back to make silver, but nonetheless, we're going to bring out our number 1 brush here. Get this guy nice and activated here. It's a little bit tough sometimes because it's been a little bit since I last painted, but should be good. All right, so we have AK's old gold. This is what I normally use for a lot of the golden colors on these guys. A little bit of a slightly tarnished but still fairly shiny gold, which can be very useful to us. So let's get started here. So we'll go around, we'll make sure we cover up any oopsies that went over with the edge highlighting. That's why I like to do this a bit afterwards. So that way we can go ahead and get this all together. Okay, now we go to the other shoulder pad here. Got a few more areas underneath that need to also be painted. A little bit difficult to reach back there, but we'll have to try without trying to get over a bunch of other areas very clumsily. Had a little bit of oopsie back there. We'll see if we have to go over that again with some of that light green. And my hand is shaking all of a sudden. This is the angle that I'm holding this guy. Sure. Let's go and make sure that his bottom side of his pommel is also painted in gold. Okay. And then lastly, we have this little trinket that's he's wearing on off his belt, held by cords. What we can do is we can just paint the whole thing in gold, and we can paint over with the red of the sword that we're gonna go to later. So make sure this thing is entirely covered. We'll come back to paint the sword in red, which most of our swords carrying the Dark Angel's insignia is going to be in. And the cords themselves will also be in red to give a little bit of contrast to the green that's mostly prevalent on the top of their bodies. Okay. Let's press their big belt buckles can also be in gold as well. And that'll be it for this guy for now. Oh, actually, no, he's not. There's one more thing that also needs to be painted in gold. I almost forgot. Okay. And we've got, of course, his top part containing the burner. That will also be in gold. that works for that. And so there will be some parts that I will like in silver, and then we'll move on to hopefully getting his sword blade as well. With a special effect we like to try to do, and we're still working on to see how well that performs. But we'll finish up here. Now I do have a case silver here that is used on the blades and some other parts that do need this coloring on that as well. Let's be sure to give a good shake, and let's see what we can do. So for this guy, we do have the sides of the hilt here, which need to be both painted in silver. Make sure we get all that underside as well. And then we have this part here right before the blade is exposed, which this should also be in silver as well. And then we also notice we have this very, very thin line here that attaches to the blade that also needs to be painted. But I did kind of go over a lot of that. Sure. Now we can hardly see the wrappings of the handle, but we do see just a little bit. So we'll have to make sure part of that is covered. And we'll be using some Galvorback red as a nice purplish red as a means of showing the wrappings of this sword here for the handle. It's not very much at all. Just to cover that little bit there. Okay. See, we're gonna need a little bit of Wraithbone now, as a little bit of an off-white to handle with some of these colors here. Mostly it's going to be the skull, this area above that, and then any bits of parchment which will be on any of their wrappings there. The wings as well can be used as Wraithbone, and we'll go over with some other highlights, as well as that little piece of parchment scrawled on his shoulder pad as well. So we got a lot to do with this, so let's see what we can do. So this is going to be Citadel's Wraithbone, if the lighting is just enough. It's white on white, so it's hard to see, but this is Citadel's Wraithbone, a knife bleached off white, which we'll be using here. Okay. Okay. Let's see now. Let's make sure we evenly coat this. Okay. We have a couple of other pieces of parchment on this side of this model. Now that reminds me, from this angle, there's a little bit more gold that needs to be taken care of on the underside of this guy's shoulder pad. So I'll make sure to cover that as well. Yeah, okay. Going over this helps remind me exactly how much gold is missing, but we need to wait till this paint dries before we go back over with that. So let's go over to this shoulder pad now, and there's a little bit of parchment attached to his left shoulder pad. So let's go over that now. Okay. And then we have a little bit of area to go over on this part of his sword. There's a skull and some crossbones. very fitting. Okay. That'll work for that for right now. And we can get away with the slightest bit of wraith bone. Now that we have this paint poured out here, on the very edge of the smoke trail here. Kind of a wispy white, but we'll work our way backwards to make this a full transition from the dark gray from the smoker all the way out to that white tip up there. Okay, so with that, we can move then to a little bit of highlighting with some, I'm just thinking, always looking over these models makes you realize just what is missing. We do need this wraith bone one more time to get to the wings onto his shoulder pad. As over here, there'll be the wings here, and then we'll go over with some highlights of Arctic blue. I do think some light blue tips on the wings does make them pop out a bit more. And then that along with some of the some actual white at the very ends would help turn these wings to life. Hopefully so. And maybe some gold on the back of that as well, where the wings touch the actual frame. Yeah, but now, I think I'm going to do one of my smaller brushes, the one of the smaller of the two. It's going to be the Zero brush, and with that, we're going to need some Mephiston red here. So we have Citadel's Mephiston red here that we're going to use. That'll be the red for the swords of the Dark Angel symbol, as well as the wax seals of their purity seals, and lastly the actual threaded cords for these guys. So I'll grab my number 2 brush because we're gonna have to yoink some out to work with. Okay, we can actually still use the number 2 brush to do things like wax seals. There will be enough surface area for this brush not to be a hindrance to that. Okay, we got more purity seals on his bottom section here. All right, that's enough of using this brush. We need to go back to our number 0 to have a bit more precision on where our nice piping Mephiston red is going. Let's go back to our number 0. Okay. That'll take care of those seals there. And then we want to work on the actual threading across his hip. So all be in the same red. Let's see here. Well, that's the threads taken care of for this guy. And then let's see. Oh, we got some more behind us on his belt line here. Okay. And lastly, we need some red on a shoulder pad here. Carrying the sword of the Dark Angel's insignia there. Okay, so that'll do it for all the, no, one more spot. There's another sword I forgot on his little trinket there hanging off the thread. Okay, and that should do it for the detailed part of this guy for now. I think lastly, those last two things can be his blade of the sword and then the actual smoke trail. So let's do the smoke trail first, because there's a little bit of a nuance here I'd like to try to get to. We need to switch back to a number 1 brush. And now let's see here. We use some of the gray. Now we need a little bit of white, and we do need to start mixing just a tad here. some of this white. Let's get a little bit of Vallejo's gray as well. That's what I currently use. It's a very deep and dark gray. But with the two of these together, we should be able to come together to make a much lighter gray, which doesn't look like it right now. Throwing some more white in there. Wow, I thought the lighter pigments would really overpower the darker ones, but it seems like the opposite is happening here. Okay, that's hopefully a light enough color here as we work our way through. So we don't have to be exact on where this color ends. We just need it to kind of fill in between, and whatever happens in the cracks will be taken care of by some Apothecary white contrast paint that we have here. So let's blend a little bit more here. Okay, so that's currently what we have right there. And then I do need to switch to one of my other brushes to be able to do a little bit of contrast paint work. So I usually for contrast paints, I do use cheaper synthetic brushes, as contrast paints do have a tendency to dye the bristles, and that's not what I'm looking for to happen to my current brushes. So I have quite a beat up number 2 synthetic brush here that will be, I'll do just the trick for us. So we have Citadel's Apothecary White. It is a contrast, so it does show up as more of a liquid ink than an acrylic paint. But with this can actually be layered on top of the current layers of smoke to hopefully tie everything together with this here. Yeah, so I think we can get away with a little bit more white at the ends, but as of right now, that's currently what we have as a smoke effect. As you can see, it's meant to be more of a smoother transition from the darker at the source of the burner all the way to the tips, which are meant to be a bit more white. So that's currently what we have for that effect. It's good enough for what we're doing right now. Okay, so that's all we're going to be using our synthetic number 2 for. And we'll come back to give it another use of contrast paints later on. If I can actually mount the cap on it properly. Okay. So the last thing that we would like to touch upon this guy actually will be in multiple spots. Also, yeah, there's a whole thing of leather we have to get to. Oh, okay. Keep forgetting about that. But anyways, though, we have a lightning effect that we normally do with these great big power swords. Hopefully it could turn out just the way that we are hoping for. So the way that this works is that we start with some, this is my number 2, I'm on number 0. Number 0, please. So we start with some, we have here to make this work, we have some Arctic Gem, which is Warpainter's very light blue. You use it on some other parts of these guys as well. And then we'll be using Vallejo's white as well as the as a starting point, or like it's the center part of the lightning itself. So we already have these blades already taken care of with some contrast of Talassar blue on top of a base silver metallic, so it still keeps the metallic sheen with the blue obviously showing up right there. But with this Arctic Gem, we're really looking to see how we can make nice little trails of lightning across the blade, hopefully as a believable effect, as these are quite powerful melee weapons in the board game themselves. So, what we're going to try to do here is, like lightning, we can kind of trail down here and just try to make hopefully straight enough lines to make this work here. The idea is that we start off with this lighter blue, and then we will show the inner part of each bolt as white, so that way it really seems like this is really going about it. So we can try to fork this off at different times here as we crawl our way down. And through the engraved letters on the sword as well. So this is just a starting point, and hopefully this will come to life when we actually input the very bright white as well. Okay, on the other side is going to be similar. They don't have to be symmetrical. That's one nice thing about this, given that this is meant to be more of a lightning effect. It just kind of goes around the entire thing, not really fully symmetrical to either side of the blade. So just keep working this through, forking off wherever we see fit, and kind of crisscross our way down around the blade. Okay, good. So there's very thin coat of that, so it should dry off pretty quickly. So now we get our thinnest brush, which will be our 0/3, is what I currently use for something like this. And we'll try to go over them in that much thinner line with actual full bright white. And we'll see if this lightning effect really come to life. So my 3/0, my thinnest brush in the whole set of real hair brushes. And let's see what we can do here. So with that's not where I poured the white. Where did I pour? I thought I poured white elsewhere. Am I tripping? Whatever. We'll just get a little bit of this white from earlier when we were working on the smoke. So what we're trying to do is that, actually it's a bit too thick on the brush. We want it very thin on the brush, and we will go over the same lines, this time in white. We try to center it as much as we can, but if it's off the center a little bit, that's fine. It's still, we'll be able to show it properly one way or another. So really not trying to overpower the blue that's already on there, but more along the lines of give it that accent color that it's looking for. All right, Dongerman says, down with the Imperium. All right, we got our first heretic in the chat, of course. Yeah, well, this is just one of the armies that I do use right now. I'm currently doing a whole bunch of painting of Dark Angels, but we'll see. I like to think that if, depending how much time we do have, because my main army is the Tau Empire, so we got one Devilfish that still needs to be painted as well, but I don't know if this will be getting to this guy today or later on in the future, but we have him on ready off to the side. Well, back to it though, we gotta go to the back side of this blade and go and paint up the same trails on this side that we worked on earlier. I think getting the Bit of white on that very edge of the blade will also help out too. Hopefully with a little bit of a sheen effect of where the electricity ends on this thing. Okay, and that will do. So that's what we're looking at sword-wise. It does a little bit of a nicer effect. I personally just kind of find just standard steel, as I've seen online for a number of swords, just kind of way too boring. This might look a little bit comical with the way that electricity really works on blades, but that's the way that works. Okay, I'm really wondering, because we got our obligatory bots in here, but there really is no method of doing that. So way to, there you go. Okay. And then we can do a ban like that. Okay, perfect. Maybe that's how you ban the bot chats from there, but that's at least from that menu. Okay, but yes, salamander green is what Noe says from YouTube, but that's the way that it goes. They look Dark Angel enough to me, at least for these very Dark Angel specific units. But that will do, except the one last thing that we need to make sure is with our brush. Again, I like to go over the actual wings of this guy. Is that the wings on his shoulder pad, they should be, if the camera can focus on that for a hot second. I do like to put a little bit of blue on the tips, and then we cover the main section with actual white as well. This does help give it a little bit more of a, I guess, more in-depth look as to what wings will look like, with the slightest blue tint to them, and then we come back over with some white. Okay, it's not really much, but this is what I like to do with it. Okay, so we have some brown we need to go over because he has a holster and a couple of belt accessories, which need to be done with a leathery brown. And hopefully that should really do it for this one model. We got to do the same thing about 2 more times with the other models of this 3-man squad of Inner Circle companions. So we are done with using this very thin brush. Let's go back to my number 1, and then we'll go use some of AK's. They call it Waffen Brown. So very interesting. This is from their lineup of more war games. And then Noe's asking for the next IRL game. Yeah, we can try. What does your Saturday look like? Because we can have IRL games on Saturdays again. That's usually the best time for the rest of the guys as well. But we go with our number 1. That's my number 0. Number 1. So we go over his holster here. There's some parts that need to be painted over in silver, which will be the tip of the holster and the half wing of the Imperium on it as well. So there's a whole area of silver that kind of holds all this leather together. Saturday looks like the 6th day of the week. I don't know what you're talking about that. Yes. But as in terms looks like, would you be free on that Saturday afternoon to set up a game. It has to be afternoon because I will be busy in the evening. More than likely. Okay, yeah, you're the one asking for the games, but you can't confirm it. Oh well. We'll have to just wait and see then. Okay, and now we need to go over some silver parts and hopefully tie this all together here. So going back to the silver that we used earlier, we need to go over this. That seems to be all metallic given the way that they sculpted this holster. Okay, and lastly, let's get a bit of his holster in the silver here. And that should really just about do it. Okay. And that will cover just about the entirety of what I normally would paint on one of these Inner Circle companions. Got Ollie from the backside with his belt, and then the main sword and the edge highlights to both the armor and his robes. So that is one complete, and we got to do the same thing over again on the next model. So let me just make sure we refresh the water on the wet palette here. It's gonna be this side. The other side is completely fine. Okay, so I usually use my number 0 to do some edge highlighting. So hopefully we can be a bit more efficient. This is the first model of the day, and I kind of had to go a lot of back and forth over what I needed to do. So hopefully this will work out a little bit better as we go over the same thing from the very beginning, which is going to be the armor itself. So we had the light green that we poured out earlier. I usually like to start with the shoulder pads, as it is a good way to start with being able to apply a nice thin line of this paint on the edges of the green armor. And that's the first shoulder pad. Let me go over the second one. Let's go to the extra armor pad that's right here. Oh, that's right. This guy's foot is in a completely odd direction here, but oh well. Hopefully people won't notice it as much when we play this guy on the tabletop. Suppose he's gonna do a nice little twirl with his whole body, so we can explain it away like that. I don't even know how that happened in the building process. How in the world can we get his knee to show this way, but his foot completely opposite direction? But whatever. It all fit somehow in the building process, so whatever. Oof, it's a big splotch there. Didn't think the brush would turn that way. Well, I think we'll be okay if we then filled in all of these. To make it look slightly more realistic there. So yeah, we have this portion of his power pack. Okay, that takes care of his power pack. Just a little bit of a thicker line there. Okay, and then we get a little bit of his upper collar here. And then we got a couple more armor pads that we need to take care of. Okay. So that will be all of the edge highlights for the main armor for this guy. And then we move on to highlighting his robes now. So let's get on with that. Here I'd actually switch to my number 2 brush, as broader strokes on the robes actually make it worthwhile. Focus on the very edges of the robe itself, and then some parts that are raised up. Hopefully we can be able to put more depth onto these long flowing robes of these guys. Okay, though that's his lower hips taken care of. Now let's reload and go into his elbows here. Okay, that's going to be the side with his robes. And so now let's get into some of the golden aspects of this guy. Let's move on to our number 1 brush and dip into some gold paint. Okay. All right, got the gold going on his shoulder pads. Let's see, you know what? We can gold up this skull on his forearm here. We hardly get any view of the bottom pommel of the sword, but we might as well get a little bit of that. Just that side. We get gold on his trinket and his keys, hanging off of his belt. Okay. And then we got the burner that needs to be all gold as well. All right. put gold on this skull here because the rest of the hilt will be silver. So hopefully that can stand out a little bit more. All right, and hopefully that rogue hairbrush does not stand out for much longer. I like to have to chop that off when it comes time, but either case though, that will do it for all the gold aspects for this guy here. So now let's try to get into some silver. This is my number 1. Let's go to 0 actually. Is there a lot of spots that might need some help with the 0 brush? Especially when I get back to his holster again behind him. Okay, now the underside. Underside is not so important because that part is hardly seen. We just get a good coat of the silver and then we'll move on to a different part. As long as that silver is where it needs to be, that's just about it. Let's see. You know what I actually like to do is that I like to get started with a little bit of silver on his rock that he's standing on as well. And then we can dry brush on some of that dark gray to tone it down a little bit. So it might look a little bit weird that he's standing on a completely silvery object, but it'll work out when we attach on some of the layers of the gray. And if there's something with perfect coat of silver, either we do something a little bit sparkly that it will stand out a little bit more later on. Okay, so there's those. Now we can get to yeah, we might as well just go straight for his holsters that need any silver on it, which will be this bottom clasp, holding that together. Kind of pushing some pigments around there, but that will work for that. We'll silver up the skull. We can get away with that sword being red as well. There are our normal themes of all sword related symbols being painted in red, and that should really be about it. He doesn't have, this guy specifically doesn't have very much silver on him, so long as I don't drop my models everywhere. Yeah. Okay. We can still keep the brush at the 0, and then we can move on to doing some of the Wraithbone onto the piece of parchment before we paint on the purity seals in red. see. Does this guy have any other purity seals on him? Is that it? I guess so. Okay. So we got to maneuver a little bit here. We need to make sure we can get to the wings on his chest. The other chest of the other guy was completely hidden, so we don't have to deal with this. But I would like to give some definition to the feathers that are on the wings of either side of the sword. Okay, and we got another spot here. That's going to be, oh yeah, first we got this piece of parchment on his right shoulder pad. Okay, and then we got some more wings on his left shoulder pad that need to be taken care of as well. So we'll start with this wraith bone, and again, we like to put a little bit of blue highlights on the bottom tips of the wings before we go over some more edges with white. So you can try to put a good amount of definition to these wings that are indented into this guy. All right, and the last bit here with this wraith bone is going to be with the edge of the smoke. At least one time, at least this very outer edge, we can get it in this much lighter color, and then we work our way to go backwards to make sure that we work away from darker to lighter. Okay. Next up, we have some of our Mephiston red, which need to be placed on certain parts of this guy, which will include his red thread attached to his belt, some purity seals, and the swords that are shown on his armor. Okay, let's go to the sword next. Okay, we got another bit of sword iconography that needs to be painted. And then we got another sword on his chest. Okay. I think that's it for all the reds that are needed right now. Oh no, that's not, no. Can't be jumping over just like that. We need the chords which are underneath. They're very, very small. It is important we try to color that in as much as we can. Any little bit that helps with this definition would go a long way. Okay, now we can move on to some of the browns. Let's go to my number 1 brush. So we got some leather items on his belt that need to be taken care of as well. Okay. And then let's get to the lightning effect on, actually first, because I want this paint to dry first and foremost. Let's get to some of that light gray again on the smoke here. And then we wait for that to dry. Oop. Oh, geez, that's not good. That just might ruin it. Let's see here. I think I'll need to employ some special solvent real quick. Fortunately, my brush got onto some glue and that's not good. Don't know if that'll break any of it up. Might need to break it up with some acetone instead. That's very unfortunate. Yeah, I need to revert to my spare number 2. Thankfully, at the very least, that is my only number 2 that I have available, but that is very unfortunate that I had to happen to at least one of them. Oh well. We'll need to do a couple of changes here. And in the meantime, I think we're gonna need yep, we got our guy back here. Let's see. We're gonna do some quick brush restoration, as again one of my brushes got into some glue that was sadly unattended here. Let's see. It's a very interesting locking mechanism. Need to be able to open up this can of acetone to save my brush, but this can refuses to pry off. What the heck is going on here? It says here to pry off that, but it's not wanting to come off. Well, time to pull out some bigger tools to handle this issue. There you go. The great smell of acetone, of course. Now let's see, can I save myself from this ordeal? That helped a lot more. As that did indeed actually dissolve the super glue that was on this guy. Oh, good old chemistry back to the rescue of handling something like that. Now that almost costed me entirely. Okay, so let's make sure to not do that ever again. I'll have to take care of this acetone at a later time, once the stream is over, to safely dispose of that. Okay. Let's see. I don't know, I think, because I got some cleaning solution out, we can at least try to do something with this guy. Some of my synthetic brushes do need a good thorough cleaning. So perhaps we can get that actually waiting on it in the meantime. Okay. That's the best that we can work with for now. Okay, so besides that little scare there, we can keep on going. Let's see. All right. But before I had myself a little bit of a scare, we were last going over doing the bit of the lightning effect on the swords of our guys here. So let's get to that. Let's start with our number 0 again. As we will get to our Arctic gem here, this very light blue that we were working on earlier. And the idea here is that we're just going to go ahead and get to the surface of the blade and go with some diagonal streaks of where this lightning effect will take us. So we can be a bit broad with it as we're looking to highlight this with the white after the fact. Okay, so we got that set up right there first. And then let's go with our 0/3, and we should be able to go with our white afterwards. A little bit on the edge, outer edge here. All right. Actually, doesn't look too bad. So we'll take that. We'll keep our 0/3. Let's go back to some Arctic Gem and let's go over those wings again. Like I stated before, wings, I personally like to have a little bit of the blue highlight to them. Give them a little bit more depth. So, go to the underside of each of them. Give them the slightest touch of blue. Same to this side here. Okay. And then we have another pair of wings on his shoulder pad, so we'll do that as well. Okay, and then we'll come back and let's go to the white, and then we'll do some white on the wings as well. Okay. And that will be our second inner circle companion complete. So it comes out quite nicely, I think, after everything is put together. Got a lot of good highlights and parts that really grab your attention there. Okay. Let's go back to our number 0 and let's start again with our third member. With some more edge highlights. I guess I'll take that. Okay, let's move on to doing the highlights on his robes. That should be his robes. Let's go to the gold now. See, same issue. We got just a little bit of the bottom pommel that will be in gold. And then the skull up here. And then the burner itself. Okay. We can then move into doing. Yeah, we might as well get some of these. Actually, not just yet. We got one last trinket to deal with. Okay. Now we can move on to some of the silvers. Yeah, still my number 0. Let's keep it with that. And this holster's got a bunch of studs on it, which also need to be painted in, so let's get to doing that. got a little bit more silver to deal with on the sword itself. All right, we can move on to some of the Wraithbone here. Just a little bit on the tip of the smoke, as we've done before. Let's get some actually on this specific feather here. It'd be nice if this was a white feather to really stand out against the red that'll eventually be here, and the browns of this time a leather belt looks like on this guy. Okay, now we need to go over the wings now on his chest. Okay, now let's go back to, let's hit some browns actually first. As I drop my paintbrush, you can switch over to my number 1. I think that'll be a better candidate for getting to these browns. Maybe we should paint the brown first and the silver on top. Especially on this part of the model, but oh well. So we got a little bit more brown to do on this side with the belt. All right, let's return to Wraithbone for just a second here. There is one piece of parchment that needs to be taken care of right here. Okay, let's do just a touch of silver on the belt buckle and then into some red for the spots that need to be taken care of. So actually, no, there's one spot of silver first. Okay, and then let's get to some red. That's about it for the reds. Let's now get into some of that Arctic Gem blue. much really gets clogged up here. All right, we'll take this. Let's try something a little bit different here. Let's put Arctic Gem on the whole edge side here, and then we'll spot it up with a little bit of white. Okay. I think we're gonna need just a little more white to finish off the rest of this model here. I need my 3/0 for this guy. Yeah, sadly, the whites that I put out earlier have all dried up, so we need to get just a little bit more. I think that should be enough. Let's go back to some Arctic Gem and some blue on the wings, and we'll be close to done with our third guy. Okay. Let's get back to the smoke for this guy. That lighter gray. All right. And then lastly, let's see if we can throw on some of the Apothecary White contrast paint, and then that will conclude it for these Inner Circle companions. Let's see, where is that number 2 that I was waiting for? There you go. Okay, let's get some of this Apothecary White right here. This will help tie everything together for the smoke effect that we are working on for these guys. And that will do it. So we got all 3 of our Inner Circle companions done. And I think that will conclude it for our live stream here today. We're live for about 3 hours. We're trying this new setup. Hopefully the quality of what I'm trying to paint shows up a lot better than what we're doing before, because there's a lot of crazy amounts of overexposure and things like that on things I didn't want to be overexposed with the previous setup. So hopefully this will work out quite well. So we got all 3. I have a total of 6 guys that we have, and next time we'll be back, we'll be trying to paint up Azrael as well. So thank you all once again for showing up today, and we'll be back hopefully on Monday next week. So we'll see you all then. We'll be posting some things on the YouTube channel as well. We're finally going to get back to a schedule of uploading there as well. But with that, that should be it for today, and we'll see you